how fast can Malaysian democracy gallop before it stumbles? And why I say gallop is that I think what the imagery is quite apt. One thinks of what happened in May 9th this year as a battering ram that had been banging at the door of the Barisan Nasional for years and years and years. And then suddenly the door gives way. And so the battering ram overshoots to an extent. And also, we saw afterward that once the gates fell open, the Barisan Nasional also disintegrated. So we are in that position where the opposition finally broke down the status, the establishment, and perhaps it is in the nature of such matters that it succeeded. It couldn't succeed by a bit. It had to succeed by quite a substantial margin. If not in figures, but at least in the aftermath of it. Yeah. And I think that's partially the situation at the moment. The answer would depend on what you think happened on May 9th this year. What trend was it a culmination of? And there are many trends that one could pick up. And the trend that you pick up would give you slightly different answers. Malaysia, like Singapore, was born with a democratic structure. And over the years, that structure had been altered and tweaked. In the case of Malaysia, the great tweaking of it happened in 1969, 70, 71, up until 74. We have always had our elections at the state level or at the federal level, but the results generally were as expected until quite recently. So if one looks at 2018 simply as an aberration, something that shouldn't have happened, that broke all the norms, then it would be, one would look at the Mahathir factor perhaps as something that was thrown in for the elections as a strategy, and it worked. That, I think, is of course too narrow a take on what actually did happen. The fact that it was so unexpected should tell us that the significance goes way beyond something that just happened to happen. Another way of looking at it, of course, is to look at May 9th as the culmination, as a tale of three elections. And why three elections? It was from 2008 where we saw that the Barisan Nasional, which during the election before that, 2004, did extremely well, almost record well, if I'm not mistaken. It took 91% of parliament seats. So it's not necessarily the case that that the Chinese would support whoever is anti-BN and then the Malays would support BN. That clearly wasn't the case in earlier elections. But from 2008 onwards, it does more look that way, that the Chinese, to a large percentage of the Chinese and the non-Malays actually did decide to go to vote for the opposition. And so one could see these three elections as a building up that finally led to, well, the battering ram. But if we stand in the Najib period, and then of course one could think of 2018 as a reaction to the Najib era itself. And of course, a lot of arguments can be put for that, largely through how Mahathir actually came back and managed also to move enough of the Malay ground to cause the Barisan Nasional to fall. That was also the period when civil society gained new life. One could, this was also the period when the Bersih movement was also active. So the inter-Mahathir period, the period when Mahathirism wasn't in power, the exciting time then was configured by the Abdullah agenda. In the case of Malaysia, Abdullah did realize that he had to have a reform agenda, partly because Mahathir had his successes, and so after that, naturally, you cannot just continue with whatever policies were in place. It will be interesting for someone now to look back and study why it did not succeed. I think the short answer to that was that the reform agenda that he presented was seen as too much of a show, too superficial, and it was not backed by proper policies, or that it did not get to the root of the problem, which was UMNO itself. In 2005, this is a few months after the opposition lost very badly, to Abdullah. The opposition, who had almost lost everything, actually met in secret in a hotel in Klang. And their plan, of course, was to work out something. And some genius at that time thought up that the common issue that they should push now was free and fair elections. And so Bersih started. Now, strangely enough, with that political, social atmosphere in place, Abdullah called for early elections. Not something one should have advised him to do, but he did. And that was when BN suffered the biggest loss in votes since 1969. So that changed Malaysian politics, that changed the imaginations, the imaginings, the agenda, the aspirations, I suppose, of many Malaysians, especially the opposition. They now saw that they could actually put together an opposition that was strong enough to actually challenge this ruling coalition that had been in power since 1974's election. So entering 2018, there were only 3 states that were actually on the opposition side. That is important because, seen with other factors, we see that it's part of the tale of the 3 elections that it wasn't a curve for the opposition of support going straight up. It was planing off. It was planing off. Before Mahathir got into the game, before this last election, it did not look at all like the opposition had a chance, despite 1MDB. Anwar was still in jail. There was no obvious Malay candidate. And for you, all those, well, most of you would, or if not all of you would know, in Malaysia, for the opposition to even imagine taking power, you must have a Malay Prime Minister candidate. The Barisan Nasional, UMNO, did a very strange thing. It left the middle ground. And in a country like Malaysia, you cannot leave the middle ground. And the reason why, one of the main reasons why Barisan Nasional had always been able to win whatever draconian measures they might have had, was that they had the middle ground. And the middle ground meant that you had to have interracial collaboration at some level. And so between 2013 and 2018, that was, I think, a time when many Malaysians started feeling despondent. Where is the country going? And then with the charges of corruption and the selling out of Malaysia to China, things got rather bad. The Reformasi movement should not be underestimated. Many of the people who are now in power, in the cabinet even, who are from 35 to 40, I suppose I could go down to Syed Saddiq, who is 26. They are all influenced by this sense that we can change the whole system. Actually, the Reformasi movement that was ignited by Anwar, that slowly grew and became bigger than all these people, including Anwar. The emerging of the concepts of Bangsa Malaysia and Vision 2020 coincided with global forces that helped Malaysia to grow at 10% per year. So at that time, Malaysia was growing only second to China. Why Bangsa Malaysia is important? It was most important to the non-Malays because it gave the idea that it was an alternative to a Malay-based agenda only, that over time, the Malay agenda was actually something that was just an interim, and that we were moving towards something else less defined. Can we take 2018 and connect it to 1969? The election results have a certain pattern to it. Even in 1969, the pattern in which the opposition gained power appears rather similar to what happened in 2008 and what happened now in 2013. So there are socio-economic, geographical, geo-economic factors in Malaysia that does decide that pattern that seems to re-emerge every now and then. Historians could go back to 1959 and look at the whole era, the whole period of Malaysia's existence. Because there are certain similarities, certain problems that were there from the start that the British left with us, that they, in very effective ways, I suppose, managed to balance and create a stable enough polity given all the restrictions, and given the fact that they were in a rush to pull back, given the fact that they were fighting communism, given that the Cold War was going on, so they packaged together and allowed for a certain polity to come into being. And the shortcomings of that polity would be the history of Malaysia. UMNO doesn't look as if it's going to come back to power by the next election. I doubt it, because it has never been able to come to power without the BN, and the BN is gone practically. So there has to be a new coalition to come into being. And one thing that seems quite certain in Malaysian politics, you need a coalition to come to power, because you need the middle ground, and the middle ground is also a racial middle ground. So at the moment, I'm still very optimistic that a lot of good things will happen. Also based on the fact that what happened in May 9th was beyond imagination. And the whole game actually changed. And now the game is about, you know, how much reforms can be carried out. Malaysia has never, in the last 60 years, been in as good a position to carry out reforms as it is now.